Here with Angie Asche, founder and CEO of Eleat Nutrition, but it's spelled Eleat, and then MSRD and CSSD sports dietitian. So hopefully I got all that right.
You did. You did. It's a lot of acronyms there.
Yes. And you and I have talked about this. Recruited your husband a little bit. Does he ever regret not going to Iowa instead of Nebraska?
Okay, it's hilarious that you recruited him at all because he like lives and breathes Nebraska.
I know.
So I'm shocked
I
that
know.
that was even
Yes,
consideration.
heck of a
You
player.
didn't have much of a chance.
Yes, I know. I know. We tried though. That happened a lot to me. I get reminders all the time of guys that said no to me. So Brandon Geyer was on the podcast with me a couple weeks ago. He also said
Mhm.
no when I was at James Madison. But you're not going to get everybody that you go
Yep.
after. So, and I told you this earlier. You've been on my bucket list for a while now because I listened to one of your podcasts with Eric Cressy, and so I'm extremely pumped about having you on here.
I'm excited to be here and talk all things nutrition
Yeah,
with
and
you.
go through your path a little bit. You're a competitive dancer and swimmer, so just talk a little bit for maybe somebody that doesn't know you.
Sure. So, again, obviously, I'm a registered dietitian. The CSSD that you read off, that stands for Certified Specialist in Sports Dietetics. So, I work primarily with athletes in my private practice. I've got another fantastic dietitian with me, Dana. We meet with athletes ranging from high school to obviously professional level. I went to University of Nebraska Lincoln, where I met my husband, who played baseball there, and then I went to St. Louis University for my master's and studied. I got a master's in nutrition and physical performance there. So obviously that tying in of nutrition to performance has always been a passion of mine ever since I was about 15 years old, and was, like you said, a competitive swimmer, especially. I just noticed that what I ate before I swam really impacted my performance. So that was kind of the, connection, the click for me that, oh, wait, what we eat really does matter. And then, of course, it became a passion of why doesn't everybody care about this? I need to learn more about this. So that really sparked a fire in me to help other athletes too. And then let's see from there, obviously, like you said, with my husband playing baseball, I became really passionate about helping minor league and major league players, especially. So I watched him all the way from obviously playing in college. We were together when he went to summer league ball, and then when he played in the minor leagues, and then in the major leagues, and now he's also a coach himself. So got to really experience kind of all the different levels with him and work with several, literally hundreds of baseball players along the way. So it's still my favorite, by far my favorite clientele to work with. And so I will say that's the bulk of my athletes right now is baseball.
Is the programming any different? Say you're dealing with maybe a 40-year veteran of Major League Baseball, and then maybe a high school kid that's just trying to work through it. Are you prescribing different nutrition for them, or is the human body the same for everybody?
Oh, it's very different. It looks a lot different, honestly. A lot of it is access to different things. So, and just the knowledge level. Someone who's been in baseball for 20 years is going to have way more knowledge than a 16, 17-year old who is very new to nutrition. So the education's going to look different. The topics are going to look a lot different. Someone like you mentioned, 40 years old, like it's going to be more so about really optimizing longevity in their career and recovery. Muscle recovery is going to become a little bit more important when you're 40 versus when you're 17. And obviously, the schedules are a lot different. Look at, a Major League Baseball schedule, 62 games in a year. So your nutrition is going to look and your supplements are going to look a lot different in that kind of uh, a sport versus if you're just in, your high school years.
And we'll dive into supplements here a little bit later on. But how was the master's program for you different than maybe what you were getting as an undergrad?
Good question. I would say undergrad was covering the surface of organic chemistry, biochemistry, nutrition 101, nutrition through the life cycle, really learning about nutrition basics. So carbs, proteins, fats, and then obviously that medical nutrition therapy piece. So it really helped the backgrounds of if someone has celiac, what do you do? If someone comes to you with type 1 diabetes, what do you do? So it really helped with that side of things. And then that master's having that focus on physical performance was okay, let's take it a step further. And now we've got a celiac athlete. or we've got, type 1 diabetic athlete, something like that. How can we make it specific so it's also improving their performance and recovery and taking all that into account? So, and a lot of research, my research thesis was on looking at inadequate micronutrient intakes in athletes to see, because I was curious, what athletes are, or what micronutrients are athletes not getting enough of. And I think in my study, the ones that were most common are still the ones that I see today. Vitamin D is really hard to get from food sources. Potassium was a tough one. And I want to say magnesium was the other one. So those were three that stuck out in the study that I did, which my subjects were they were college basketball players and then minor league baseball players. So that's who I looked at, and it's still true today. Vitamin D is often one that's inadequate intakes from food, potassium, magnesium. So it's kind of interesting that, 10 years ago when I was in grad school, it's kind of still true today.
Yeah. I mean, what are you recommending from a supplementation standpoint on those, on vitamin D, magnesium, and
So,
potassium?
vitamin D and magnesium, I like to look at blood levels first. So, we do conduct blood work. Obviously, if it's, high school age athlete, we're always going to provide education first on food sources. But I do like to give the example of, for vitamin D to get enough, to get even just like 400 IUs daily, you'd have to eat about 10 eggs a day. So it is pretty tough. I mean, some guys, maybe they do eat 10 eggs. I haven't met anyone that eats 10 eggs a day. And I have a lot of athletes that love eggs, but so it's hard. Salmon is another source, but if you live in a state like, Nebraska, maybe you don't really have access to fish as much, or you don't like fish, it's hard to get vitamin D from food. And if you live in a part of the country that doesn't see the sun as much, then that obviously makes it harder to get enough vitamin D as well from the sunlight. So it's a very, very, very low risk, if any, supplement to take. So that's typically one that I do recommend, saying in this scenario, supplement's going to be the best solution. So I obviously like to look at food first, and how can we make sure that you're getting enough from food, or educate you on food sources so you don't have to supplement. And then if that's not the case and we have to add a supplement, then so be it with something like vitamin D. And same with magnesium. It's very, very rare that I see blood levels that are low of magnesium, but in the case that I do, and if they really struggle to get enough food sources, which magnesium is most prominent in plant foods. So if they're not eating a ton of leafy greens or nuts or seeds or legumes, which are beans, then it's going to be hard to get enough magnesium. And so, of course, those are all very nutrient dense foods. I'm first going to say, eat more of these. And then let's also add in a magnesium supplement, which can also aid in, reducing muscle soreness and help with sleep. There's so many benefits to magnesium. So that could be another one they could supplement with too.
That's what I take at night. I take a magnesium supplement at night, so helps a lot. So, what are some things that you felt like were good in theory, but maybe aren't good in practice now?
Like in school, or
Anything?
good in theory, but aren't as good in practice? Okay, so one that just immediately came to mind, I would say green powders are very popular now, and they're good in theory, but when we actually see them in practice, it doesn't teach the athlete to consume more of these nutrient dense foods. It's basically like saying, oh, you don't need to eat any fruits and vegetables, just mix this powder and water, and boom, there's all your produce for the day. What we're seeing, at least, there's one research study recently that showed how high some of the products were in heavy metals. And so that's always a risk of consuming high amounts of heavy metals. Another risk is a lot of those greens powders, they're not regulated because they're a supplement. And so if they don't carry that NSF certified for sport certification or informed sport certification, then you run the risk of obviously contaminants, banned substances, things like that. So, and just the benefit of eating whole foods versus just supplements. There's some really interesting research on how when we eat a whole food source of something, all of the nutrients in that food are used synergistically by the body, and they work together to obviously help promote, positive health benefits. So you get more phytonutrients from the foods, which are, polyphenols or antioxidants. You get just in general more nutrients than you do if you just have that tiny powdered form of the food. So I think in theory, they seem like a good idea. And in many cases, like take a minor league player, for example, where they are playing in the middle of nowhere, USA, and they're constantly in a bus. and they want to take a greens powder. I say, all right, you know what? As long as it's NSF certified for sport, which I think there's only a handful, uh, then go for it. By all means, have it every now and then. And if you see a vegetable on the way, make sure to add that to your Subway sandwich.
Is Athletic Greens certified?
It is, yeah. So
Because
athletic
that's the
greens is
one you always
one.
see the most. That they do
Yeah,
the most
yeah.
marketing.
So that one is, yeah, they do. That one is NSF, and then I believe Ladder has one too. Ladder Sport has a NSF certified for sport greens powder. So those would be a couple.
What are some other misconceptions that you see with the people that you're working with that come in with that about nutrition?
Hmm. I would say more recently that carbohydrates are not necessary. Especially I think on, the carnivore diet, carnivore MD, Liver King, all those things. I see a lot of male athletes coming to me that are like, oh, I'm just going to eat meat, meat, meat. And these vegetables and carbohydrates are toxic, right?
Okay.
And obviously that's not the case. So it just kind of requires a little bit of education and breaking down and saying why carbohydrates are so important. So in the case of athletes and, baseball players, especially, you guys are playing game after game after game. You need carbohydrates to help replenish your glycogen stores, especially if you're someone like a pitcher who's pitching several innings. You've also got strength training in there at some point during the day, something like that. You are consistently training, so your body is consistently using carbs. And a lot of people, it surprises them when I say that at higher intensities, your body actually needs higher intake of carbohydrates. So the harder you are training, the more carbohydrates become a priority. So I think that's a common misconception. A couple other ones, obviously, that to gain weight, all you need is protein, 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 which protein is absolutely key to gain weight, but you can eat all the protein in the world. And if you're still in a calorie deficit or just at calorie maintenance, you're not going to gain weight. And I've seen this too in athletes. They're eating 250 grams of protein a day and they're still in a calorie deficit because they're not eating enough carbs and fats. And so when I try to say, I try to educate on different, fat sources, then they're worried, well, won't I gain fat? No,
Eat
obviously
a ton of
not.
avocado, you're gonna be okay.
Yeah, if you're eating avocado and nuts and seeds and salmon and all of those good nutrient dense fats, that's going to be a lot different than if you're just having, nachos with queso and, Taco Bell all day. That's going to look a little different.
What are some of the resources that you're having your trainees use to track their calories?
So I don't have any athletes really tracking their calories, but we use some different platforms. So what I'll do is I'll have the athlete take pictures of their food, or we'll have a shared notes app or something going on so that it's just whatever is absolutely easiest as possible. And then I'll go through and I'll analyze that for them. I really like the pro or the gold membership on the chronometer. I used to use Esche, which is like a food processor, and that's actually what I used for the nutrient analysis of all the recipes in my cookbook that I have. But I just tend to like chronometer better because they have more of the like mainstream items, if that makes sense. It's updated more frequently. And I find that it's a lot more accurate than something like MyFitnessPal. It's MyFitnessPal, you have the issue of anyone can just add any food. And I know like there's one huge glitch in MyFitnessPal where sometimes if you pick the wrong garlic, it says it's like 1,000 calories or something for minced garlic. So you kind of got to be careful with that.
How intensive was it putting the book together?
Oh man, the book is a labor of love for sure. So yeah, I forgot to mention that in my intro and not to plug my book here, but I did publish a book May of 2021. So Fuel Your Body: How to Cook and Eat for Peak Performance. And I really wanted a resource that was not only a cookbook with super easy, simple recipes for athletes, but also an educational guide. So covering the basics of sports nutrition. So one whole chapter is all about calculating your energy needs and how to estimate that. Pre and post workout nutrition. So, kind of covering the basics there, what to eat before a game or after a game. I covered recovery nutrition and anti-inflammatory diets. I covered cooking basics. So if someone picks up that book and they're an expert chef, they're going to be like, this is horrible. Like it's telling me how to boil hard-boiled eggs. But that was so important to me because I wanted the high schooler who's going off to college for the first time to be able to know exactly how to do these things. So it really does break down those cooking basics, and it has some meal prepping tips. It has some sample uh, meal plans for if you want to gain weight or lose weight, or if you're vegan, vegetarian, there's options there. And then there's what was really important to me was having a symbol there for recipes that did not require a kitchen, because I had so many athletes that were living in hotels for long periods of time. And so they obviously didn't have access to a full kitchen, but they might have, say, one blender, or they might have a lot of players in their hotels have like an instant pot, or a lot of college athletes in dorms, they might have like one air fryer, one like utensil, like one item, one appliance that they could make a lot of different recipes in. So that was important to me so that they could at least feel like they're still cooking when they don't have access to a full kitchen.
Somebody that's money stretched. I mean, how can they make all this work? Especially minor leaguers, they don't make a lot of money. So how can somebody eat healthy when obviously it's cheaper to eat fast food? I still think that the government should subsidize fruits and vegetables so it's cheaper than fast food. But how can somebody attack that maybe isn't doesn't have its own?
Totally. And if you would ask me this question like 4 or 5 years ago, I'd be like, what? Fast food is way more expensive. But honestly, groceries are very expensive. Fresh groceries are getting really expensive. So I feel for the athletes there, but I also do think that places like Chipotle and I even did a price comparison one time where I compared a Chipotle bowl to making your own at home, basically just this like shredded salsa chicken recipe that I have in my cookbook, which is just putting chicken breast down in the bottom of a crock pot, pouring a jar of salsa on top, letting it cook all day long, and then just putting that with beans and rice, which beans and rice, whole grains and legumes are some of the most affordable items, and they are truly so nutrient dense. So things like quinoa or canned black beans or chickpeas, things like that, are a really easy way to get nutrient dense foods in at a very low cost. But I compared those two together, and mine was, I can't remember the exact numbers, but I want to say it was like a quarter of the price. So it does require, of course, more time and more effort. So you have to kind of weigh the odds of that. The Chipotle is more expensive, but it's a convenience thing. You know, if you don't have access to a kitchen or to all these ingredients, then obviously that's going to be a better option. So I think it's, working with a professional, working with a dietitian is really helpful because we can help to figure out, how to prevent as much food waste as possible. Because you're already spending so much on groceries. So let's plan ahead and make sure that the items you're buying at the store you're using in so many different ways that nothing's going to go to waste. I think that's really helpful. And then, yeah, just buying those really cheaper items, more affordable items. Typically, I'd always say eggs are one of the most affordable protein sources, but now even the cost of eggs is like astronomical. I'm like, how is a dozen eggs $6.99 right now? It's crazy.
What are some of the challenges with a vegan diet?
Challenges with a vegan diet. So obviously, I'd say the number one is going to be probably making sure that you're educated on protein sources, vegan protein. So making sure that you're getting a good variety of protein sources and not just choosing the same one every time, because there are different amounts of essential amino acids in each protein source. So giving the example of something like legumes, chickpeas, black beans, lentils, if that's all you eat, then you're not going to be getting as much, let's say, like leucine or other amino acids that are in things like tofu and tempeh or soy products, edamame. So if you have a wide variety of plant proteins, I would say you can absolutely still meet your protein needs on a vegan diet. And I think with vegans, especially, supplementation of um, certain vitamins and minerals can be helpful too, like vitamin B12 in case they're not getting, fortified B12 foods, but otherwise B12 is primarily in meat and fish. So if they're not eating any of that, then obviously that's something that I would add. And vegan versus vegetarian, the difference is vegetarians often eat eggs and dairy. Well, eggs and dairy provide B12. So if, again, you're completely strictly vegan, then that's one I would add. Vitamin D is another one that I would definitely consider. Omega-3 fatty acids, if you're not eating any fish, would be another potential supplement. But if you're eating plant sources and enough plant sources of omega-3s like walnuts, flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, then it's not as much of a concern to supplement. I'd say the last one that I think is definitely beneficial for vegans and vegetarians especially is creatine. So creatine is found naturally in meat and fish, and we know the benefits, of course, of creatine supplementation for athletes. And so what we find is that vegans and vegetarians especially notice the largest improvement to their phosphocreatine stores when they supplement with creatine, because they're not getting a ton from their diet. So those things especially. And then the last thing that I just thought of too is, if your goal is weight gain, sometimes a vegan diet can make it more challenging because it is so high in fiber that fiber is very, very filling. And so it can be hard to eat more food when you're full all the time. So you might have to focus on a little bit more lower fiber foods here and there if you're trying to gain weight. And obviously more like nutrient dense plant sources like nuts and seeds are going to be helpful. Adding in a plant-based protein powder into like a big smoothies and shakes are such a great way to gain weight, could also be beneficial too.
Is that why you picked Nebraska? They were doing creatine research before anybody was. That's how I started taking creatine, because Nebraska football was taking creatine. So in the mid '90s, they were starting to do some research so I studied it. But is that part of the reason why you picked Nebraska?
Well, honestly, I was born and raised in Lincoln. So my heart was always a University of Nebraska Lincoln girl. But that's a huge reason why I picked sports dietetics. Was when I was 15, I went and shadowed the sports dietitian at the University of Nebraska. James Harris is his name. But I had no idea what a sports dietitian was when I was 15 years old. But I just had told, because my dad is a sports medicine doctor at Nebraska. And so he had told me like, oh, you're interested in nutrition? Well, there's this thing called a sports dietitian. And I'm like, really? Well, I'll go shadow him and, see what that's like and see if it's something I want to do. And so then I feel like I'm one of the like odd people out there that knew what I wanted to do when I was 15 years old. Because after that week of seeing what he did, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. This is exactly what I want to do. So, but I do know, obviously, nutrition. Nebraska was like one of the pioneers when it came to sports nutrition and strength and conditioning. So I'm not surprised they were using creatine in the 90s.
Is it still recommended meal frequencies about 2 to 3 hours? Try to get some nutrition.
Like every 2 to 3 hours,
Yeah.
try to get meals in. I mean, especially if your goal is to maintain or gain weight, I say yes, meal frequency does help. And for high school athletes, I think it's so important because you're constantly studying, you're constantly at classes, school, you've got practice right after school or sometimes even before school, depending on the sport. And so you are constantly having to either use your body for physical reasons or for mental reasons. So that food consistently throughout the day will help make sure that you're getting enough nutrients in consistently. And that's why I do preach breakfast so much for high school kids, because if you go to school and you didn't eat anything, you didn't put anything in your body, you get to school and now you're sitting at a desk, your energy levels are already going to start to crash. And then if the first time you eat is, say, 11 o'clock at lunch, then you're just setting yourself up to not be able to get enough calories in throughout the entire day, especially if you have practice after school. And some of those if you're getting school lunch, on average, the range, at least it was a few years ago, around 800 calories. So unless you're adding additional things to your lunch or bringing your own lunch, it can be really, really challenging to meet your needs.
It's a heavy time heading into preseason training here. What do you recommend at this time of year for people to get ready for competition?
Oh, I'd say have a good strength training program. If you're not already, working with a strength coach and in a good program, that's truly number one. It's such a good time, like in the off season, to prioritize that. Um, and then obviously nutrition goes hand in hand with strength training. So when you ramp up your strength and conditioning, your training, you're going to also have to ramp up your nutrition and making sure that you're making the recovery a priority. But also, I'd say take advantage now, like when you're talking off season, I should say, before you get into the midst of the chaos of the season, I would say take advantage of learning a little bit more about cooking if you can. So even if you have never used something like a crock pot before, ask a parent to say, hey, how do I turn this thing on? How do I use this? Because there is going to come a day, especially if you're a senior in high school and there's the potential for you to maybe get drafted and go to the minor leagues, then you're really on your own. Or if you go to college and maybe it's a JUCO or a smaller school, you're going to have to cook some things on your own. And that's where having those skills now in the off season is really going to pay off. So I'd say for the most part, focus on nutrition for recovery, eating good nutrient dense foods, try to get some good cooking in there, learning the very, very, very basics, ask someone for help, and then strength training for sure.
What are your recommendations on maybe snacks, like healthy options for snacks during the day?
Healthy options for snacks. I'd say make sure to incorporate some sort of protein in there and some sort of produce if possible. So I like to say the two P's, protein and produce, easy to remember. So protein sources, you could do like string cheese, you could do Greek yogurt, you could do cottage cheese. Those would be the dairy sources. If you have a dairy intolerance, that's not your thing. Maybe you do like you could do like a sandwich with rotisserie chicken and have, some whole grain bread and maybe put some shredded lettuce or something on there for a little bit of vegetables at least. Or maybe you have some fruit on the side. You could do maybe like some nuts or seeds or a peanut butter, something like that to get a little bit of protein in. And then the produce could be some sort of fruit or vegetable, depending again, kind of on your goal. So if you're an athlete that's wanting to lean out a little bit or lose some weight, then I would say really prioritize the vegetables, the fiber-rich veggies. And then if you're someone who's trying to gain weight, add some additional carbs to that snack, like bread, or put it on a bagel, add some banana, some dried mango, something that's going to be a little bit more calorie dense.
Are there better bread options out there than others? Like if you're in the grocery store, what are some decent bread options to pick up?
One brand I tell my athletes to look for often because it's pretty readily available is Dave's Killer Bread.
Yeah,
I think it's a pretty good one. They've got good ingredients
they
and
do.
their bagels are pretty delicious. They have got, I think, maybe 10 or 11 grams of protein in one of their bagels. So I am a fan of the Dave's Killer Bread. I like the simple ingredients. I'm not a big fan of the breads that are like the Sara Lee 45 calorie, those kinds of things. There's just a whole bunch of ingredients and things that you don't need. And bread, if bread is only 45 calories, like you got to kind of question what's in that. What is going on in there?
Do you have any athletes doing intermittent fasting?
I do have a couple, not necessarily because of my
Yeah.
recommendation, but they come to me because they are intermittent fasting. They want help with that. And I will say, never are they looking to gain weight. So if you're looking to gain weight or gain a significant amount of muscle, I say don't do intermittent fasting at this time. Obviously, with intermittent fasting, well, just in case there's someone listening that's not really sure, there's several different types of intermittent fasting, but the one that I see most frequently is that like 16-8 method. So the time restricted feeding. Basically, you're only eating within an 8-hour window. So maybe like trying to do the math quickly in my head. What is that
Like 8 to
like nine to
4, 8,
five?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yep, yep.
Yeah. 8 to 4. And so in these cases, it's mainly like, maybe 10 to 6 or something. So basically, they're just kind of waiting to have their breakfast. And so in the case of someone who's looking to gain weight, it is really hard. Let's say if you have someone who needs, all right, you need 4,500 calories to gain weight. Now you've got to fit 4,500 calories in 8 hours. Oh yeah. And 2 of those hours, you're actually, at the field or you're in the strength room. Like there's just so many things that can make the time restricted feeding more challenging if you're trying to gain weight. So I say definitely don't do that. I will say if you are an athlete who it's your off season, you're trying to lose weight, and if you personally really struggle with like late night drinking or late night snacking, eating after dinner, then I think intermittent fasting could be totally fine. I think it's smart to work with a dietitian still to make sure that you're meeting your nutritional needs within that 8 hour or however long window, 10 hours. Some people do 12, just to make sure that you're getting your nutritional needs in that time period. But if it helps you to not eat and snack late at night, and if it's not negatively affecting your social life, you're not telling your friends, hey, I can't, it's after 7 p.m., so I'm not allowed to eat dinner. As long as it's not affecting your social life and you're seeing results, then I'm fine with it.
Has Cody's nutrition changed much from playing to now coaching?
From playing to now coaching, I mean, honestly, not a lot. He doesn't eat as much, and that's been hard because he doesn't train as much. I think, last year was a hard year for him because he was a minor league hitting coordinator for the Orioles. And so he basically had to go to all the different affiliates, and he'd be at one affiliate, like double A for 3 days, and then he'd be at triple A for 3 or 4 days. So it was a lot of, he was always in the hotels, and it was a lot of eating on the road. So thankfully, he's married to someone that can help educate him on what to eat on the road, healthy options on the road. But he still, you still have to eat a lot of meals out. So still a lot of Chipotle, and it's just a lot of making healthier choices on the road and knowing that, okay, I don't need as many carbohydrates as I did when I was playing, because I'm obviously a lot less active and I don't have to stay at this weight. So yeah, it's changed a little bit, but I will say, I mean, he still does a lot of the same things. He still does the same supplements because he still works out in the gym all the time. He still does the same shakes and smoothies for all the nutritional value there that they have. So
It
yeah,
seems
for the
like
most
they're
part,
doing
it's
a better job of nutrition with the minor leaguers. We have Greensboro's here in town, and it just seems like they're doing a little bit better job. I know every organization is different, but it seems like they're trying to do a better job with their nutrition with the minor leaguers.
yeah, I think they are. It's like what you said. Every organization is so different. And that's why I love being in private practice, because I get to work with an athlete who may or may not be on, 5 different teams throughout his career. And so I get to learn a lot about what their nutrition is like with one organization versus the other. And so in some instances, like I know, for example, the Toronto Blue Jays, they have a dietitian at every single minor league affiliate, which is fantastic because then you've got maybe what 30-ish players, 25, 30-ish players that you have to worry about for one dietitian. It makes more sense. And then you've got some organizations, like I won't list names, but they may only have one dietitian for the entire org. And that's over 200 players. And that's all over the country. And then you've also got players in other countries. And how are you going to keep up with them when they go back to, their home country in the off season? So there's very, very little communication and help there, with those organizations. So I will say it just depends on the athlete and where they are. But I think pretty much every single team, if not for sure every team, has someone at the major league level, which is definitely helpful. But I think the minor leagues are the ones that need it the most,
Yeah. What would you like to see out of the high school athletes that you're seeing that maybe they are not getting enough, that they could make some immediate impacts right now to switch?
Hmm. Good questions. I think high school, there's really no education on nutrition at all. Like there's so many high school athletes. I always ask the same question when I have a new high schooler, what's your background in nutrition? Like, have you had any health classes, anything? More times than not, they don't even have a single health class that goes over like what a carbohydrate is. So I think that number one needs to be a priority because it's something that they carry for the rest of their life, regardless if you're an athlete or not. Nutrition is a part of every single person's life. So it's surprising to me that there's not like a nutrition 101 class in high school.
And
Just
sleep
learning.
too. I mean that's the other thing. There's
Yeah,
no education on sleep, and those are really the two things for longevity. If you get on top of your sleep and your nutrition, you're going to be healthier for most of your life.
absolutely. And sleep, I see so many high school athletes suffering from right now because they rely so much on caffeine, and they all have cell phones and they all have social media. And so many of them are, drinking caffeine too late in the day. They're staying up on their phones too late at night. And then they've got to go to school at, 7 a.m., 8 a.m. So I'd say sleep for sure. And then some type of nutrition 101 class would be amazing. If they could get into college and already know what a carbohydrate, what a protein, what a fat is, instead of having to seek out. I mean, obviously, I love getting to work with
Right.
them, but instead of having to seek out a dietitian to tell them, some of these very basic things.
When should you stop caffeine intake?
I usually say it's so different for each person. I always say afternoon, like 2 to 3 p.m., stop. I recently actually just posted this study that looked at caffeine consumption and sleep. And it was specifically looking at how much caffeine had a detrimental effect on your time to fall asleep, which is sleep latency, the duration of your total sleep, and how many times you woke up during the night. And they found that after 5 p.m. is when it really had a detrimental effect. And so I like to tell, especially athletes like baseball players who have games every single night, that because I'll see sometimes them drinking, like a Red Bull right before their 7 o'clock game. And I can understand that performance benefit, but then I also have so many athletes that are like, it's so hard for me to shut my brain off after the game. And then if you've got, an instance where it's a Saturday night game and then you've got a Sunday 1 p.m.,
Yeah, an
day
away
game,
day.
yeah, it's going to be really hard to get enough sleep that night. And so that especially is where I'd say, because if you're just someone who's got like a one-off race or a one-off game and that's the only one that whole week, like it's not that big of a deal if you can't turn your brain off right away and go to bed. But for someone who has games every single day, I see this in hockey too, because we work with hockey players. It's really hard to have that much caffeine that late at night. So I would say maybe even 2 or 3 o'clock, stop drinking caffeine. Really focus on that caffeine intake earlier in the day, morning, afternoon, and then look at how much you're consuming. So I'm not a big fan of caffeine powders because it doesn't hydrate you at all either. So at least the benefit with coffee or a coffee drink or something like that is at least you're getting some more fluids in you too. But if you're just downing pre-workout powders that have 300, 400 milligrams of caffeine, that's just not going to make anybody feel good. And the monster drinks that have 350 milligrams,
And
it's
a
too
lot of
much.
sugar. There's a ton of sugar in those too.
A lot of sugar, and we're already so anxious before a game. And so I mean, caffeine is fantastic, don't get me wrong. It has so many benefits to our cognitive function, to alertness, to benefits to performance, to obviously endurance, things like that. But there is too much of a good thing, and it can really lead to a lot of anxiety and increased heart rate, nervousness, things like that can make it a lot worse. GI issues for a lot of athletes too, that we don't want during a game.
How can parents, maybe they got a son or a daughter that doesn't really want to eat healthy, how can parents help their child?
Oh man, I've had so many parents reach out to me from high school saying, basically, I know what to tell my kid to do. I tell them, but they won't listen to me. And so I think having an outsider they really like, so that like even if the parent has said 18 times, hey, vegetables are really good for you. Like if they hear it from a sports dietitian who works with professional athletes, they take it a little differently than they do from mom or dad. So I think like that is one very helpful thing that a lot of my high school parents have said to me is just basically like, thanks for reiterating what I've been telling my kid for years. Other things I think obviously modeling like what you do in the home is going to help them too. So I have a daughter myself now. She just turned 1 this past weekend, so I'm really in the thick of like learning about how to be a parent essentially, and especially the food side of things. I want to make sure she's got a healthy relationship with food and everything else, and a wide variety in her diet. And so one of the things I read recently was that your child is so much more likely to eat the food if you often eat the food. And so I think that's really important, is that as parents, if you're not eating fruits, you're not eating vegetables, you're not eating salmon or lean proteins, why should you expect your kid to be doing that too? So I think that's another thing.
Yeah, and I eat fruits and vegetables because of my mom. I do. I mean, we always
Was your
have fruits
mom?
and vegetables in the house, and same thing with our kids. I have a 20-year-old and a 17-year-old. They do, for the most part, eat healthy because it's not a thing. Everybody, willpower is not an actual thing. Like, so if you just eliminate those options and they're not even around, that's the best way to do that and model that, is just don't have any unhealthy options around.
And modeling that behavior too. I do think like every now and then obviously it's okay to say, yeah, you can have a cookie. There's nothing wrong with that. I think if you never eat dessert or never eat pizza, then your kid's going to go to their friend's house and be like, holy cow, this is what I've been missing out on. So I think it's important to have some of those things every now and then, but exactly what you said, like your mom was always having fruits and vegetables, you were having fruits and vegetables. So kind of the same thing now with my daughter, like she eats what we eat. And so I think, yeah, just modeling that behavior is really going to help. And if you're unsure, if you're a parent and you're like, well, gosh, I don't feel like my diet is very good, meet with a dietitian as a family. I can't stress enough the importance of, I mean, that's what we're here for, is to help educate you. It's truly what we've had, decades of education on. So it's not expected of you to know this, off the top of your head, especially if you haven't had any nutrition background. And with everything in the media, it's so confusing. You've got one person telling you a vegan diet's best, you've got the other person telling you carnivore is best. Like those could not be more totally opposite diets, and you're somewhere in the middle of like, what the heck do I do?
By the way, Liver King is getting all kinds of extra help that he's not telling anybody. He looks like that because he's got a lot of extra help chemically.
Yes, that is not liver. That is steroids.
Yes, that's
That
steroids.
is a hefty amount of
That's
steroids,
steroids.
which I do not recommend.
No,
Liver,
no.
sure. If you want to eat liver, great, go for it.
And breakfast still is the most important meal of the day, correct?
I mean, I don't really like that saying as much because
Yeah,
I
that's right.
feel like it puts too much emphasis on one meal, honestly. I think truly like what you do over the entire day matters more. I know that's not like a catchy saying, unfortunately, but it's the same thing with that goes with like say protein. People that focus on like, oh, well, do I need to have this many grams of protein post workout? And I like to say the amount of protein that you have throughout the entire day matters so much more. And there's research to back this up too, where yes, certain amount of grams is important post workout, but if those are let's say that's 50% of the protein that you eat in your entire day, like then you're not doing what you need to be doing as far as protein goes. So I'd say what you eat as a whole during the entire day matters most.
Is there a right or wrong way to creatine supplement?
Um, a right or wrong way. I'd say the right way would be choose an NSF certified for sport or informed sport certified. That's number one. Even if you are not an athlete that's drug tested, just do it. It's just highly recommended for many
It's
reasons.
crazy, like when they've tested like stuff that isn't regulated, what is actually in there. It's not the label says.
Exactly. And because supplements aren't regulated and you don't know what type of facility it was produced in. And there was an instance where, not to get too off track, I'll come back to creatine, but there was an instance recently where someone was taking, like a multivitamin and it had traces of like a blood pressure medication in it because it was processed on the same factory line. And so that's why the importance of, the testing, the third party testing comes in because you don't want that risk of something that's, contaminated, whether it's banned or not. So the right way would be to look at certification. I would say make sure creatine is the only ingredient. Creatine monohydrate is the cheapest, but also most effective option. If you like powder or pill, it doesn't really matter, but 3 to 5 grams is a typical dose. I would say to make sure to consume some type of fluid with it. It doesn't matter if you do water, if you do orange. A lot of people like orange juice with
I did
it. You can
cranberry juice, just because the
cranberry
research
juice.
was saying that it helped creatine get into the bloodstream better if you took it with cranberry juice.
Yeah, and I think it's like juice in general because of the carbohydrates, but cranberry juice, that's interesting. I like that. It's very rich in antioxidants. So I will say most of our athletes do it post workout and they put it in their smoothie because it's just easy. So
I
they,
loved it
put
post
all
workout. I loved it.
yeah, they put it all in there. They put the fruit in there, the protein powder, and then they put the spinach in there, or not spinach, well, spinach, yeah, too. And then creatine in there too. It doesn't really matter. The timing doesn't make too much of a difference. So I like to give the example of like, it's not something like caffeine where you feel it immediately. Creatine is something that saturates your phosphocreatine stores in your muscles over time. So it's not so much about when you take it during the day, it's how often you take it during the months to years. So I would say, yeah, as far as how the right way to take it, it's that. The wrong way to take it, obviously, assuming that more is always better. That's not necessarily the case. You could do a loading phase if you want. A lot of athletes, they do like to do that for about 4 or 5 days. They do like 20 grams and then you go down to 5 grams. Not going to really make too much of a difference, but it's totally up to you. I think just knowing that, taking 20 grams a day every single day, that's
You're going to flush a
not
lot
right.
of that out, aren't you? Correct.
Oh yeah. And it's just going to be a waste of
You're
money.
wasting money.
Yeah,
Wasting
huge
money.
waste of money. So, and then I think also a lot of people will say, oh, well, creatine is in food. So I get enough from my meat and fish. But I also like to give the example that you would have to eat a pound of meat or a pound of steak every single day to get 1 to 2 grams of creatine. 1 to 2 grams. And you know how tiny those little scoops of creatine are for 5 grams. So, and I do have some athletes that do eat a pound of meat a day, but still, it's only 1 to 2 grams.
Yeah. What about beta alanine?
Beta alanine, I don't have as many athletes taking beta alanine to be honest, but it's an amino acid. It works as a buffer essentially in the body. So in doing so, it helps the pH of our muscles. Not try not to get like too technical, but essentially helps reduce that like buildup of acid so that we can potentially work harder for longer. So beta alanine is also found in a lot of animal products because it's an amino acid. So if you're eating a lot of different protein sources, you are getting some naturally from that. But if you wanted to supplement, I'd say, you definitely could as long as it's an NSF certified for sport, informed sport. I would recommend pre-workout. So there is timing to it. Take it before. But also be aware that one of the side effects is potential GI issues. So a lot of people, not a lot, I shouldn't say a lot. Some people complain of, like bloating or gas discomfort. So try it out maybe during like a not super important workout. And then, your body can hopefully get used to it. And yeah, but otherwise it's very, very safe. And one of the other very few like proven effective supplements out there.
You have anybody taking MCT oil?
I did when the
Anybody doing
bullet.
keto? I mean, do you have? I
I
wanted
was
to
just
get. I
gonna
wanted
say,
to. That's where you see it is in the keto world. I mean,
yeah,
and
yeah.
what are your thoughts on the keto diet?
Oh gosh. So for baseball and for the sports that I work with primarily, and at the level, the high level, elite level that I work with, it's just proven not to be the best solution. Now I will say there are some rare scenarios. If you're an ultra runner and so you're performing at a much lower intensity for a longer period of time, I think that it could potentially be a fine diet. Or if you're someone who is trying to lose a significant amount of weight and you're not physically active, then I think absolutely. And that's the problem is a lot of people, they take research studies like, oh my goodness, this person on a keto diet lost 40 pounds and, was no longer type 2 diabetic and all these other things, improve their biomarkers. Well, that person is also 50 years old and doesn't exercise, and so you have to look at the context and the audience, or I guess the subjects in the study to see if it even has any relevance. And that's the problem with research and with headlines in the news is you'll only see what the study found. You don't know anything about the methods, anything about the subjects. And so you can't replicate that into professional athletes. So I don't recommend it to my athletes at all. I think that a modified low carb diet could potentially work for some people, again, depending on the sport. And I also, to answer your question about MCT oil, I don't have a ton of people doing it anymore. I think bulletproof diet has kind of like slowly.
It was fad for a little bit, and then everybody
Yeah.
comes back to the middle with everything. There's
Yeah.
always
People
those new
realized,
fads.
oh, this is stupid. I'm putting 400 calories of butter in my coffee. So I think people are realizing that and realizing that it's not a good way to eat long term. But MCT oil, you can get MCT or medium chain triglycerides in something like coconut oil or something like that. So if you still want MCTs in your diet, you could always, use a little coconut oil in your cooking or something.
We're recording on January 17th. Do you know what today is called?
Today is called, I don't.
It's called
Should I?
Quitting Day because this is the day that most New Year's resolutions stop for people.
Oh, which is
It's
so,
called
it's
Quitting
so
Day.
sad.
But
It's
only
sad.
8% of New Year's resolution. That's why I don't believe in New Year's resolutions. It's in my
Yeah.
talk when I talk on high performance stuff. It's in my talk that only 8% of New Year's resolutions last the entire calendar year. So I don't believe in New Year's resolutions.
That's because people make these outlandish, like they think that nothing is going to happen throughout the year. Like no life changes, no serious things are like, and their resolutions are too extreme. You got to start so small. I tell my athletes, like, it should seem almost like ridiculously small. Like, are you kidding me? I can't do this. I
Make
think,
your bed. I mean,
yeah,
they're
make
just
your bed.
those are things that get you rolling in the right direction.
Mhm. Start your day with 8 ounces of water. Like 8 ounces, really, just one cup. Like just and
That's
you'll
why
be
it's always
amazed.
with me because
Yep.
if it's not around, I have to take small sips. But that changed my cue on a lot of things was my water bottle. So that was a huge change for me.
Yeah, I'm glad how popular the Stanley and the Yeti cups are getting
Yes.
because now people are actually bringing water bottles to places.
Do you have a fail forward moment? Everybody has to answer this question. Do you have something that you thought was going to sidetrack you along the way, but looking back now was one of the best things that happened to you?
Um, Gosh, I feel like, social media and everything is such a highlight reel. Like if you see me now, you don't get to see all the places I failed at or all the people that I reached out to along the way to, I'm thinking of different like just different companies or different organizations, things like that, that, I had reached out to about certain projects that ended up not going through. All you see are the ones that accepted, me along the way. So it's hard to pinpoint one. I think the biggest one maybe would be just going full force into starting my private practice, because I loved my job that I had in St. Louis. I was working in an athletic training center, and I really wanted to be able to travel and live with my husband, Cody, during the season. And so I had no idea how to start a business. I didn't even know if I would be able to get clients, but I just went full in. And I think, at the time it felt like a fail, for a couple months, like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? But obviously now, how many years later, 8, almost 9 years later, it's been a huge success. So
Yeah, and that's why I like bringing in different people in the industry because everybody, that's a common theme for almost everyone that's been on the podcast, is they all have some ups and downs to get to where they're at. And I interview a lot of elite performers and everything, and that's a common theme for all of us, is that you're going to stumble along the way, but you got to pick yourself up and keep moving.
And just remember that you don't see a lot of people's stumbling. That's behind closed doors. People don't publicize that. So don't assume that I've never had an instance where I was turned down or anything, because that's absolutely happened.
How did you come up with Elite? Because I like the spelling, so it's a
Yeah.
nice play on things. How'd you come up with
I
that?
Yeah, I hate to give him credit, but it was my husband Cody that came up with it. I hate to give him credit. So I wanted something that I could make my own, and so it couldn't be just any word in the dictionary. And so we kind of meshed elite and eat obviously together, because I knew elite athletes were going to be who I worked with. And yeah, so that's how we came up with elite. We knew we could trademark it and make it our own, so that's
Love
what
it.
we did.
What about your morning or evening routines that you have that you really like?
Oh man, it has changed a lot with the
Once you have
newborn.
kids, like I tell new parents all the time, I'm like, hey, I'm going to tell you a lot of this stuff, but when I had young kids, all bets were off, and you're just going to white knuckle it for a while.
Yeah, so I will say, getting some sunlight in, even if it's cold, like some sunlight in first thing in the day, it really does help my mood. And then drinking water is always on the top of my list too. Um, Bedtime routine. I wish I had like a more specific bedtime routine. Most of the times I'm just so tired from working and watching my almost now toddler all day, that I kind of just sit on the couch and relax, just like decompress from my day.
Yep. What other books or podcasts or resources that people can dive in on the nutrition side that will help?
On the nutrition side, well, I mean, you had mentioned Cressy earlier, and I know Cressy's had a couple. Eric Cressy, strength coach, he's had a couple other dietitians, nutritionists come on. So I definitely recommend that. Other resources, obviously, I hate to plug my own book, but Fuel Your Body: How to Cook and Eat for Peak Performance is a pretty good book out there. Trying to think of other resources off the top of my head. If you're really trying to like if you're a strength coach, and which I can't stress enough, I should have mentioned this earlier. If you're a strength coach listening, or a coach that's always just around athletes that ask nutrition questions, then obviously you're not going to be able to make them a nutrition plan or an off-season plan or anything else. You'll direct them to a dietitian for that. But I think it's really good to have a strong basis, so that when they ask you that question in the moment, you're like, oh, I can provide a little bit of feedback on that. And they're the ones, or you're the ones that they see the most. They don't see me as often. So I love when I meet with, like, I had one player at he had previously gone to Mizzou, and then he went on to minor league, and now he's a major league. And his strength coach was awesome, because he was pretty good at like communicating with me too. And so then we would like all three kind of communicate together. But getting off track here, a good book for you would be the Sports Nutrition Guidebook, is I think what it's called, and it's through the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. But it's a big yellow book you can get on Amazon. But the Guidebook to Sports Nutrition for Professionals, that's what it's called.
That's part of the reason I got some recruits, because on our recruiting dinners and breakfast, I was hammering them about eating healthy. So like it kind of hooked the parents in a little bit, and guys still talked about that showed up. They would talk about me ribbing them, like trying
That's
to mix the
awesome.
salad in and like all. And I'm like, just wait, like when you get here, we're gonna eat healthy, and again, trying to model for them. But yeah, it started in the recruiting process.
And it makes such a huge difference, because, like I said, the strength coaches are the ones that are around the athletes the most. So I have to kind rely on them to tell them good information and not be like, oh yeah, try keto. But and I will say too, like if you're on Instagram, I post a ton of content there for athletes and for strength coaches, for other health professionals, or coaches that want to learn more, want to share a simple video or a simple graphic that can resonate with something that they're trying to get the point they're trying to get across to their athletes. So that's a good place to look to.
What's
Is
your
my
Instagram handle?
It's just at Eleat Nutrition. So all one word, Eleat Nutrition. ELEAT. A little play on
Yes,
words.
yes. What are some final thoughts or something I should have asked you that I didn't?
I don't know. You asked me so many questions. I felt like I was drilled on so many
Yeah.
different topics.
This is one of my favorite topics. So,
Yeah.
outside the baseball world, the sleep ones that we do, the nutrition ones, the high performance ones, these are always my favorite ones because I do try to study it as much as I can because I'm trying to help myself also.
Yeah. Well, I mean, gosh, you covered so many different great things. I can't think of anything off the top of
Cool.
my head.
Well,
But
Angie, thanks for jumping on with me. Like I said, this was a bucket list, your bucket list guest for me. So I appreciate you coming on.
well, thanks for having me.